Hello and welcome to episode 57 of the Be Life podcast, coming to you from Canton Nazarene Church in Canton, Ohio. I'm Joe. Josh is here as usual. We have Zach, our producer, behind the camera and who producing this show. And we're joined today. This is a fascinating gentleman. Joe Tarantino is one of really the most fascinating men, I think, to cross our paths in a while. He's a member of our church. He's a leader in our church. He's had many leadership positions here and has been a major part of Canton Nazarene. But he's like Superman. He has two identities, and you have to know him. He's like a mild-mannered chemist, aerospace engineer, husband, father, church leader, like I said. And then he turns into this maniac endurance athlete who has cycled through all 50 states, did 25 marathons, and he wrote a book in 2018. I think it was around 2018, 2019, Bicycling Across America's Great Northwest, When Fear and Faith Collide. It's basically the final 31 days of his trip across North American continent. And he has another book coming out soon. We'll talk about that as it goes. So, Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. I can't wait to talk to you about this.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. And I got to correct you on a couple, statements here. First of all, the Superman label, I don't like that at all. It's not even close. And, Superman had his kryptonite. My problem is sometimes hubris. Sometimes you think you've done something that's impressive, and man, you run across somebody that's done something so incredible that you just feel embarrassed to tell them what you did, and we talk about some of the people that I've run across in some of my travels. The other thing too, and I want to bring out too, we've talked a little bit about my writing and the book and things. And I just read this just yesterday as I was doing my devotions. I don't know why it just popped up, but it came from Psalm 71. And I'm just going to read a little excerpt out of it here. And it says, "All day long I will proclaim your saving power, though I am not skilled with words. I will praise your mighty deeds, O sovereign Lord." And then it goes on, and he says, "Now that I am old and gray, do not abandon me, O God. Let me proclaim your power to this new generation, your mighty miracles to all who come after me." And I'm thinking, here's the psalmist saying that I'm not very good with words. I mean, he got into the Bible,
Yeah.
And here I am. Yeah, so the scripture says, "Now that I am old and gray, do not abandon me, O God. Let me proclaim your power to this new generation, your mighty miracles to all who come after me." And I'm getting old and gray, what's left of my hair. But at the same time, this was one of the things that I just felt God leading me to do, regardless of how good or bad a writer I thought I was, that he would provide the editors and the insight and the words and the decisions that would glorify him.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm reading your book. I haven't completed it, but what I've read has drawn me in. And I'm telling people out there, I'm not a cyclist. I never have been since my Huffy broke back when I was 15 with the streamers and the little cards and the wheels that made putt-putts. I haven't ridden a bike very much at all. And this drew me in. Your preface or
forward.
Your forward. We talked about this.
Yeah.
But your forward drew me in. It made me feel what you were feeling. So I would take exception to what you're saying. We're going to sit here and take exception with each other. I'm taking one on the way you wrote this book because it drew me in.
Well, I'm glad that you felt like you were part of the journey, because one of the things when I read books or articles on bicycle travel or touring, sometimes I feel like it's a travel vlog where somebody will say, we rode our bikes to this town, and then they get out and then they talk about what they did, all the restaurants they went, and then we got on our bikes and rode back. And to me, it didn't have anything to do with biking.
Yeah.
And so what I tried to do, much to my editor's disappointment, was describe a lot of the feelings I had and what the road conditions were like, the weather, so that people could feel that wind in their face, as they were riding and experience some of the things. So I'm glad at least one person is admitting to.
Well, I felt like that. You wrote in your forward, you said, during the 70s, I began a dream about riding my bicycle across the North American continent. Now, that's not a typical dream, Joe. You're in your teens in the 70s, correct? If you're like me.
We moved from the teens to the 20s.
So did I. But so you've got this dream that you wanted to ride your bike across the North American continent. Now, had you done endurance training up to that? Were you a runner in high school?
I did a little bit of everything. I've always been, most of my life, all the stuff I did. I'm a jack of all trades and master of none. But we played, I love playing softball, pick up basketball in the neighborhood. I played in the 70s, the lab I worked at, where there's about 100 people in the standard slag division. And we played in the Steel Valley Slow Pitch Industrial Softball League against, the big,
that's a heck of a name.
Big teams. Yeah. The
slag team.
Yeah. We were standard slag, but we played against, some pretty big steel mills up there. They had 5,000 people pulling from, but I enjoyed doing that kind of stuff. I played a lot of tennis.
But that doesn't prepare you to ride across the continent.
No, it doesn't. But my brother and my cousins and I, we rode our bikes a lot, and we had a couple long trips. And I thought, this would be a fun thing to do. When I graduated from college, from Greenville College, Greenville University, now I thought I was offered a job there. I'd been working at this lab in the summers, and I came back and they'd offered me a full time. I thought maybe I should take like a month off and it's about 3,000 miles across the continent, 100 miles a day. Yeah, I could do that. And then I thought, maybe this isn't quite as easy as I'm making it to be. I'll just do it some other time. And I kind of knew at that point in time, that was it, that it just wasn't going to happen. But the thought was, I would love to do that sometime. That just seems incredible. I'd read about a couple people that have done that, but got married, got kids, career.
Mm-hmm.
And so it didn't happen then. But I always enjoyed staying active. I ran track at Greenville my senior year. And I think that's when I started getting into a little more of the endurance training part of it.
Yeah. I'm just fascinated by, I know spiritually, you have to look back now and say, I don't know if in the 70s you realized it was God talking to you. This whole thing spiritually is fascinating to me, but we'll get into that later. I'm wondering if you look back now and you could see God's hand in this dream that you had.
It's interesting because each probably step of the way that I go now, every month it seems like as I get further along in getting ready for this next book coming out, there are things that I just feel like God's revealed to me that I can look back now and see how he led me in a certain way and how his hand protected me through some things. And it just vividly comes to mind. It doesn't have anything to do with running, but I owned a Datsun 240Z. And I don't know if you remember, the old Z cars.
I remember those.
And those things could scream.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first got it, it was tuned up. It was great. I mean, I'm going on some roads that I shouldn't have been going as fast.
Too.
And I mean, I hit 90 miles an hour and I'd shift from third to fourth and rear wheels would chirp on that thing. And I just was flying. And somebody passed me on the way home from work one time I thought it was kind of a beater car, and I didn't like it. And I'm chasing this guy because I want to pass him. And we come up to a, corner that was supposed to be about 40 miles an hour, and I'm doing about 90. And that car went around that corner, and in a blink of an eye, that thing tipped, went on two wheels, and came back down. Stuff flashed all over the place. And I realized that, God just protected me. I mean, he said, because there was telephone poles in front of me. There's no way that I should have been able to make that corner.
You walked away from that?
I didn't hit anything. The car came back down and I let the guy go, and I was about a mile from home, and I went in, and that was it. And I said, I am never going to drive that car that fast again.
Wow.
Or any other car.
Wow.
But not only that, but there's just going back so many other things that, God led me into a certain path, and it turned out to be bicycling. And so many of the things I did initially, there was no intention of anything spiritual about it at all. In fact, in the book I got coming out, the one section, the first many years that I wrote, I called it a collection of dumb decisions, or bad decisions or whatever. And that's what it was. It just was stuff that we kind of decided we wanted to do as kids, or I wanted to do on my own, and wasn't prepared for it, and, paid for it in a lot of cases.
Yeah. And growing up in the 50s and 60s, we had a very long leash. Our parents weren't like the parents today. You disappeared, and as long as you were home when the street lights came on, you could do whatever you wanted. They didn't care. As long as you didn't come back all bloody.
Well, I'll talk a little bit about that in my book. My mom wasn't quite that. She didn't have
Ours
a
were
leash
just
quite
like,
that long. But yeah, it was different. Yeah, we spent a lot of time out by ourselves, and sometimes you got home and you just didn't want to answer the questions that were being asked.
So as you've gone through the process of collecting these stories and these thoughts as you're reflecting back on your experiences, did you ever have did you ever sort of play the comparison game between what's going on in your life now and the things you've done in the past and become nostalgic almost to a fault? Because I feel like sometimes when we reflect on the good things from our past, it can almost it just causes that comparison trap. It's like, man, I did these amazing things. Now I'm just in the regular season of my life, and I'm just going through the motions. But at one time, I had these amazing accomplishments. Is that something that you ever wrestled with?
You know what, Josh? That's a really interesting question, and it's probably the exact opposite for me.
Okay.
Sometimes I reflect on some of those things I did, and I use them. Said, man, if I got through that, situation, I think I can make it to the end of this trip that I've got today. But when I was going through, and I'll back up a second, because last year I rode to Alaska, and that was the 50th state. And then from there, I had already started trying to summarize all my trips into a book about all 50 states. And I realized very quickly that I was going to make War and Peace look like a haiku. I mean, I just had pages after pages of stuff. So I got an editor involved and tried to help me out. And one of the things that she talked about, she says, this reads like a journal, a bicycling journal, a travel journal. And we want to have something more substantial and how it impacted you. And I always felt, God's, leading in this. And she would ask me questions about some of the stuff, particularly some of the earlier stuff. And it bothered me as I reflected back. And the one meeting we had, I told her, I said, you've cost me a lot of good night's sleep. She said, what do you mean? I said, because you got me thinking about stuff that I didn't want to think about anymore. When I started thinking about some of these things and where I was spiritually and some of the bad decisions I made, I didn't like it. And I didn't like thinking about that stuff again. It was, God forgave me those sins, and, I don't want to remember them again.
Yeah.
And so, it's just kind of the opposite. I mean, every once in a while, I wish I was, 18 years old and I could do these dumb things on a bike and ride all day without being prepared and suffer the consequences and get up the next day and do it again. But it's just kind of the opposite for me. But that's a good question.
Yeah.
That is a real good question. How did marathons fall into this all of a sudden? You could be, everything's been cycling.
Well,
and then you run 25 marathons.
I mean, 25 marathons, like that takes a while to accomplish that. When did that start?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I started ran track at Greenville, and when I got out and I graduated, I continued running. And we were married, and it was busy and all that stuff. And finally, I settled, and I said, I'm going to run a marathon. This was back in 1980. And I got up to about, 13, 14 miles of my training. And I went back to graduate school. I was looking for a master's in analytical chemistry at Youngstown State University.
Wow.
And so I just ran out of time to run. And so being a good husband too, there was just too much stuff going on. And it got away from me. And then we got kids, we moved, jobs and things. And then I went back 20 years later and went to Walsh University and got a master's in business administration. To do that, I was basically going full-time as a graduate student while working full-time. Wow. And so I had to cut so much stuff out of my life, including sleep, 3 or 4 hours. But I got through it in about a year and a half. And when I got done, it was like all of a sudden I had all this extra time. And so I started running again. And the plant that I worked at, they entered a team into the Akron Marathon. And they said, do you want to be part of it? And I said, I think I can get up to run, a 10K leg, 6.2 miles. And so I did. And I ran the first leg of and I sat in the stadium. It was a Rubber Duck Stadium now. Mm-hmm. And so I was the first one. So I waited and watched everybody coming across. And as I watched them, I said, you know what? These people don't look like they're as good a shape as I am, and they're running a marathon. I should be able to do this. So it was 2004 before I finally got kicked in. And so a year later, I ran, actually it's this weekend, Cleveland Marathon. And I ran the Cleveland Marathon, was the first one I did. And I'll never forget when I crossed the finish line, my wife and my son came up to me and said, "How was it?" And I said, "One and done. Never again. I will never, ever run another marathon." And I think I say that after almost every marathon that I've run, including the last one. But yeah, so then I started doing that. And my goal was I wanted to qualify for Boston.
Oh no.
And Boston is challenging. And
did you do Boston?
I did Boston. And I tell people I am much more disciplined than I am talented. And so what happened was I got into a pretty good routine where I knew what I could do to achieve a certain time. And all I had to do was just get older and not get slower. And so I did. I got older and I didn't slow down, and I finally qualified and I ran it in 2019.
No way.
That was the last one before and so I felt like I needed to take some time off. And so that was marathon number 24. And then I really kind of focused a lot on the bicycling to get through all 50 states. I did manage to run another one this year, March 1st, the Myrtle Beach Marathon. I took a day off and then I drove down to Jacksonville or to St. Augustine, where I'd ridden my bike to before after running the Myrtle Beach Half Marathon. And then from there, I rode all the way down to Key West. It was 500 miles. And I got back and I think I'm still recovering. And so I have not held a press conference, but I think that's my last one. I think I'm retiring from marathoning.
25. And I look at the difference between here you are, a cyclist, a person who spends countless days on, I could picture these roads being those roads you look at and they're waffling in the heat and there's tumbleweeds and there's mountains and there's stuff, and you're out there by yourself, and you're that type of guy. And you even said in your book that you're one of those trainers who likes to train on your own. And then there's this other side of you, Joe, who is running competitively marathons. Those two don't fit to me.
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of my experiences, I go to the yin and the yang. There's the one side and there's the other side. And which one's the dark side and which one's the good side, the Star Wars geeks decide. But I think what it amounts to was, for training to run Boston, I knew what I had to do. I knew what the times were. I knew what the pace per mile was. I read several books on it and tried different training programs. And a lot of times it just comes, what's the weather going to be like on the day you run? And I just failed. I mean, there was one time I came within 2 minutes of qualifying, and I had pushed through it so hard. I got injured and I had to take about 8 months off. And each time you're coming back, as you get older, it takes longer to come back from those things. But I finally got it. But it was so analytical and it was very precise that I think the bicycling was just a chance to just escape all that. I didn't try to do it at a certain speed. I mean, every once in a while I get in. If there's somebody ahead of me.
Well, it took you 31 years to get across the continent.
Yeah, it did. It took a long time. I did some work in between there too. But yeah, and so that, I mean, I love just in town, riding around, coffee shops and when I ride, I'll take off, 15, 20, 25 miles and then just stop, hit a cafe. I kind of research ahead of time the night before, find a little diner or something like that, those local out of the way places. And it's just a chance to just kick back and relax.
Yeah.
But then again, at the same time, there's some days that, you're doing 75, 100 miles and it's hot, or it's cold and, it's a challenge, but it's a different kind of challenge. There's no points for finishing sooner. It's just like any airplane landing you walk away from. Any day of bicycling where you arrive at the hotel, it's a good one, if you get there safe.
It's fun thinking about your personality. Like you were saying, you're not just cycling along until you find a random spot. You've researched where you're going to stop, and you know where these places are, and you know your distance, and you know about how long it should take you. You're that very analytical mindset. Are you able to still find peace in the midst of it? Is it a relaxing experience? I mean, of course, strenuous on you physically, but is it mentally relaxing?
That's another good question. And if you take a look at the book, Joe, and you haven't been through it all, but if you look in the back, there's an appendix and it lists my itinerary. And it looks like there's a lot of data there, but I've expanded that spreadsheet to include a lot more data on my subsequent trips. And I know that when you get tired, you don't think well. And so that's why a lot of marathoners, they have a band that they put on where they can read the times they want at a certain distance to remind them where they need to be. And so I would put for the trip, here's the hotel, here's the address, here's the phone number, here's how far I got to go. And then I kept blank spaces. And at the end of the day, I would write down, what was the starting temperature? What was the real filter? What was the relative humidity? What was the finishing temperature? What was the high temperature?
Why?
I just wanted to know all that information. And I put it in this big detailed spreadsheet that nobody else in the world probably cares about, but I needed that to remind me. And I didn't realize it at the time. And I've got another scripture I want to read for you here, why I've documented all this stuff. In fact, now's as good a time as any day.
Go ahead.
So most of us remember those that have read the Bible, you get through these first few books of the Bible, and there's one called Numbers, and it's got a lot of numbers in it. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, when I was reading through here, it was probably about a year and a half ago, they were done. They got there. And this is from Numbers 33. And in verse 1, it said, "This is the route the Israelites followed as they marched out of Egypt under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. At the Lord's direction, Moses kept a written record of their progress. These are the stages of their march, identified by the different places where they stopped along the way." He told Moses, write this stuff down so you don't forget. Now, I didn't realize it at the time why I was writing, but I think it was the Lord. Write this stuff down so you don't forget how difficult it was. You did not do this on your own power.
Amen.
I gave you the strength to complete what you needed to do. I gave you the challenges so that you would not believe that this was by your own power you did this. And I really believe that was a way for him to feed my geeky technical side with spreadsheets and things, but also embellish me spiritually to understand that it was him providing the strength for these things and not just through my own efforts.
I love that. You're a data-driven person, and that's the language that you speak. That's how you process the world around you. And so, yeah, you have testimony of what you were able to accomplish, and you give God the glory for it in those accomplishments. And it's in the language that speaks to you.
Well, and I got to be careful here because the one editor said, we need to write some more of your feelings down because we want to get your readers have got to know you better. They got to like you. I said, well, that is going to be a challenge.
Why? I don't agree with that.
And well, here's the thing, Joe. When I'm writing, and you've heard the expression, I think Dan even appreciate the hangry. When you get hungry, you kind of when you're biking, there's probably some term that you could come up with, but you get tired. I'm not always the pleasantest person, and my wife would be very much seconding that emotion. And as part of this yin and yang, I didn't really talk about it yet, but when I went to Greenville as an undergrad, I was a double major, chemistry and English.
Wow.
I've met one other person that's done that.
Yes, that is really unique.
And so I didn't see a career in English. So I had been working in this lab ever since I was 16 years old. I started there when I was a junior in high school and just loved the technical side of that and sitting quietly at an analytical balance, weighing up stuff and doing things and just have my own thoughts in my mind. I'm naturally an introvert. I hate to describe myself by the Myers-Briggs personality, but when I read what an INTJ was, and every time I take this test, it confirms it even more. At first, I almost got emotional. I was like, there's other people like me out there. Now, there's very few of them, but there's other people like this, that feel this way and do these things. And so that is kind of the yin and the yang. And so part of it is, yes, I need this data and I do that. But at the same time, I love reading books, medieval English, and all these quests, the Lord of the Rings. And I kind of refer a little bit, I refer to that a lot in some of my adventures, when I kind of feel like that, kind of lost. But yeah, it's both sides of that. So I definitely need the data part of it, but for the biking, I think it helps bring out a little more poetic side of it.
Listen to this. I want to read this for you. This is from the book. This is an excerpt from the book. Joe wrote, reflecting back on the day's ride, instead of focusing on the valley of the shadow of death, prayer of protection, I was instead reminded of the first words of the Psalm of 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The daily rides during this trip may not always be what I want. A smooth downhill road with a brisk tailwind, free of all manner of wildlife and traffic. However, God would provide what I would need and I would not want. How often do we pray for God's help, focusing on the valley of the shadow of death, not really believing he can truly provide? God wants us to have faith in his ability to answer our prayers and then live victoriously and enjoy the day's ride. Now, I think that is very good.
Yeah.
That's his writing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is not analytical.
No. Not only a wise sentiment, but also well laid out there in that writing.
And that struck me as I was getting it, because I always did my devotions before I left, and it was always focusing on, Lord, I'm getting ready to ride through the shadow of death. You better take care of me. And I got myself kind of worked up into a frenzy before I started this trip there, that I had actually thought about, and I talked about a little bit in the book, that I'm flying out and we had all kinds of airplane turbulence, and I'm not a very good flyer. And I thought, this is not good. And I'm looking out there and I see this landscape down there, this barren landscape going over the, and I got to ride a bike. I said, you know what? Nobody's making you do this. My bike is waiting for me at the hotel. I'm going to get there. I'm going to rent a car. I'm going to drive back. I am not going to fly back, but I'm just going to rent a car. We're going to come back.
How your mind works.
Yeah. And it just kept messing with me. And so I finally got past that. I put the bike together, got all that stuff. But that really, the Lord just said, you know what? I didn't bring you out here to put you through all kinds of trauma. I want you to enjoy this, and I want you to be open to what I'm going to speak to you for however long it takes you to get to where the destination.
But and again, you made us feel that. You made us feel what you were doing, the tailwind, the whole thing. I wanted to ask you, I touched briefly.
By the way, Joe, I don't want to interrupt you too much here, but for a bicyclist, there is no such thing as a tailwind.
Well, you said
it's just a good day.
Okay.
You never have a tailwind. It's only a good day.
I didn't know if you had, put wings on it or anything. But I mentioned 31 years, and I mentioned it briefly, but I want everyone to know this. You went 5 segments. You ended up making this 5 segments, 31 years. How hard was it to wait in between? You had responsibilities. You obviously have a career, a thriving career, a family, the whole thing. Church, everything you've got.
And not just a regular church member, a member of church leadership.
Yes. And so you have this takes you 31 years. Judging from what I'm hearing from you and your personality, you want to get going. How hard was that to wait?
It really wasn't that hard, to be honest with you. It was occasionally I would feel some frustration. My goal was to never have somebody carry me out of the office, after I'd passed away. I really wanted to retire at 30, and then I got married, and my wife had other plans, and then I set it at 50, and then we had our second son. And so I still kept on with it. Lord, whatever you want to do. And I was able to get out early enough, and that was kind of the goal. And I thought, well, when I retired, then, the kids would be gone out of the house. I would have more time to do some of these things. And it just didn't seem right to take a lot of time for vacations that I would just go bike by myself and leave my family behind. And so it wasn't that hard. I think probably one of the more frustrating, when I finally retired, and a lot of that comes out in the book, but part of it was, the Lord led me to, the timing was perfect. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I retired early. I said, now I can start focusing on a lot more training for qualifying for Boston. I can do all this biking that I wanted to do. And part of it was also help take care of my dad, who was 97 at the time, and his health was, he'd still lived alone by himself, but he was needing more and more help. And my brother was in Youngstown, and he was doing a lot of that. And I felt like I needed to be part of that. So I retired. 2 weeks after I retired, he had a series of mini strokes, and he was gone within a year. And I spent basically full time taking care of him. And there was some frustration in there. Like, this was my retirement, and, I'm in good shape now. I don't know how long I can do this kind of stuff. And Lord, how long is my dad going to live? He always joked. He says, doctor told me I'm in good shape. He says, I had an aunt that lived 108. Doctor said, there's no reason why you can't live that long. And he says, man, I hope not. He goes, getting old is not all it's cracked up to be. And,
that's so true.
Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't that difficult, but at times I felt a little frustrated, particularly as the end when I felt,
The ending?
not really, not really, because, and I won't give away a whole lot, but I felt God speaking to me during the final ride. And as I finished, and part of the story that I added on to the book that you read are all the beginning things and the lessons learned. And it really made it abundantly clear to me why I failed when I first tried to ride from Chicago all the way to the West Coast, and it didn't work out. And so I knew where I ended up at. There was a little grocery store, was the farthest west I got in this little town called Winter, South Dakota, which I didn't feel like one at the time. But when I finally got to that point and I passed it, I knew I had connected my route. My wife was waiting at the hotel, which is another couple miles ahead. But God had already just explained to me the whole purpose for me riding and connecting this trip before that. And it was a very emotional moment. And I'll let the readers discover that. But when I got there, I passed that spot. I said, yep, there it is. I did that. I was there before, and then I rode on, and Barbara was waiting for me. She goes, oh, she was more excited than I was. And I'm thinking, I got about a 14-hour drive. I got to get her to the airport. And so I said, get your pictures. Let's go to the hotel. I'm going to get my shower, and we're going to get in the car, and we're going to go. So it really wasn't a celebration like I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
It had happened emotionally before me, before I got to the end.
I hear you.
Do you feel like you have a community that supports you and celebrates with you in these accomplishments? Because these are big accomplishments.
I do, and Barbara's my biggest fan.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. And I talk about it. So I won't go into too much detail in the book, but I had an interaction on the trip that I failed that said, you know what, my goal was I wanted to ride across unsupported. I want to do it all by myself.
Yeah.
Well, unless we went back and rerode some of the routes that I did my early trips with people that I knew, it was already tainted, so to speak. It was, I didn't do it by myself. So it was kind of a silly thing to do. But I had this interaction with this guy that I met, and I told, you need to be here with me. I'm calling you up. I'm trying to tell you what I went through every day. I'm seeing all these things. And I would just feel, is this something you'd want to do? And she said, maybe. She likes to go cruises. So we've kind of,
Maybe.
yeah. So I got back and worked on it for a little bit. So when I started this last leg, I said, and she said, well, I've got something planned. Can't get there for a certain amount of time. And so I rode through all of Washington State, and then she was supposed to meet me when I finished up. And then she got a travel voucher to get some money to stay an extra night. So it was another day. So she met me in Idaho, but she's my biggest fan. My boys, they celebrate with me. My dad, my mother-in-law were kind of funny. The one trip that I did when I got back, they looked and said, well, how was it? I said, it was good. They said, wouldn't it have been shorter to drive there? And they were both in their 90s. And, and I just couldn't describe it.
Funny.
I said, it probably would have been a little bit quicker if I'd have drove. But the point was to get a bike ride in. So
I was thinking while I was reading and while I was thinking about this, that most of us have to carve out quiet time. And we spend time in our busyness, get up at 5 or whatever. You do what you can to carve out quiet time. And that's kind of sad that we have to do that a little bit. But in your riding, in your biking, you just had, you had the epitome of quiet time. You were in God's nature all by yourself. There had to be
the diversity of it.
Yes. And the thoughts had to be amazing. Your time with God had to be amazing, Joe.
Well, it's in the book that you're reading was out in the Great Northwest. There's other times it wasn't so quiet because I ride through cities a lot too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And, you got your head on a swivel and you're watching where you're going. Yeah. But out there it was. And it's interesting because I had finished that ride and my younger son, Marco, asked me, he said, what do you think about, when you're out there?
That's a great question.
What do you think about? And it varied from trip to trip. There were some trips where I would take and it would just be a time of devotion and prayer. And that would, and next thing I know, it's like an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours later, man, I've just covered 25, 30 miles and, I'm already halfway to my destination or whatever the distance, a third of the way. And then I start focusing on what I had to do. And when you say, what do you think about? There's another part of it was, what's coming up? What's the weather doing? How's my bike? And I hate noises from a bike. I hate noises. And so I've stopped a couple because there'll be a little squeak and I stop, I get my tools out and try and find it. And that doesn't work. Got to stop again. But I like the nice quiet sound on a bike. Other times I'll start thinking about, a situation at work or maybe leadership team, what do I need to say? What do I need? And I try to process those kind of things. It just is a variety of thoughts or planning long term. But I would always try to get my devotions out of the way, early so that I could, whatever came into my mind and just try to keep it away from garbage. But a lot of time it was just, here's what I got to deal with. And there are some times when I got preoccupied and I missed my turn and led to some issues. But yeah, it is. There's a lot of alone time out there. The interesting thing was, you just don't ride. I don't ride nonstop, and none of these guys ride nonstop. That even like the Tour de France, and it's just a funny little story here too. People just don't understand long distance bicycling. And one person asked me this after I did this long trip. They said, "That's really cool. Did you ever think about riding in the Tour de France?" And it would be like asking your local softball team, "Did you guys ever think about participating in the World Series?" It's so off. These guys, it's funny. Incredible what they do. But yeah, you stop, and particularly some of these areas where it's so remote. When you're riding, you've got the wind in your ears. You're thinking, you're processing. If you're going over gravel, you hear the chain, you hear the crunching of the stones, and there's just this. And then all of a sudden you stop and you want to get something to drink or get a snack. And all of a sudden, nothing. And all you hear is maybe a coyote or some animal in the distance howling. And it's like, man, I got to get my snack then. I got to get back on the bike and get going and take that sound. Because all of a sudden your mind will start messing with you.
Yes.
This is what's waiting for you ahead. So yeah, there's a lot of alone time out there. And I did try to learn. One of the things I found when I tried to do devotionals, it was very helpful because it helped me focus. And it's a discipline to get up and ride every day and do all that distance, but to mentally keep your mind focused on something during the trip. And so, if I'm riding through the city, it's like, now's not the time to try and,
I get that.
So there's certain areas that that you're going to have some time and you can relax and try to focus a little bit more. But it really helped me from a mental discipline standpoint too.
You're still riding.
I still ride.
This isn't like you've retired from that. You're still riding. You just finished Alaska last year.
Yep.
When did you do Hawaii?
I did Hawaii. That would have been a little over 2 years ago. And my goal was, it's kind of tough to ride to Hawaii.
Yeah.
And in Alaska,
kind of tough to ride to Alaska.
It was a lot of riding to get there too. And so I kind of promised myself, I'll keep a connected route where you just can't fly and drive to the Four Corners and, ride around, a little 20-foot circle and say, well, I've got those 4 states out of the way. My rules for myself was I had to have a connected route, through all the states.
Okay. All right. So how did you Joe, now wait a minute. I have to ask you that's a long connecting the lower 48 with Alaska.
I didn't do it. I didn't want to do it. That was that was one rule that I had. I didn't have to do that. Yeah. And so you asked about Hawaii. So I thought if I got through the lower 48, I'm going to relax. There's going to be more of a celebratory ride. So Barbara loves cruises. So she scheduled a cruise to Hawaii. I researched ahead, found a couple of bike shops nearby the cruise ports and, walked to those, rented a bike and rode around a couple of days and got my miles in and experienced Hawaii that way. And then spent the rest of the time on the cruise with her. Alaska, I had a couple different ideas on what I wanted to do. And it started out, I was just going to ride. We're going to land in Anchorage, fly in there. And then I would ride from Anchorage to Fairbanks. It was about 250 miles. And I thought that'd be good. That's enough. And then she'd pick me up and bring me back home. And as I started going through all the logistics, I ran across a group called Alaska Bike. And when I started looking at what they offered and for the cost, it was about the same of what I was doing because I had some one-way flights and things. And so what we did was we flew into Anchorage and we spent a couple of days there sightseeing. And then I connected with this group. And what they did was, and it was really a small group, 8 people plus 2 guides. And I had always avoided group bike rides because I just didn't know if I could handle people. But there was a great group and we had a great time. But they drove you by the quote unquote, the boring parts of Alaska and took you to the more scenic parts. So we went by Denali State Park.
Wow.
And the only disappointing thing, I didn't get to ride in any cities. I didn't get to visit all the little cafes. And these guys would leave like, well, we're going to leave about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, get breakfast, and then we're going to drive for an hour to drop you off. And I thought, man, it's going to get dark. Well, in July, there's only about 3 hours when it is at light.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it was a lot different experience. But yeah, so we rode around and did about 400 miles before we finished up. And so that was Alaska.
And what's next?
Well, the last trip that I did, I just mentioned, I did the marathon and then I rode from St. Augustine down to Key West. And I really felt as I was riding, I was struggling because this marathon beat me up and it beat me up bad. And I started thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this. And the thought came to my mind is God said, I've provided you protection on all your trips. There's going to be a time when you aren't going to be able to do this stuff. Don't jump out of an airplane and say, God, land me safely, So there's going to be a time. And so right now, I don't have anything specifically planned. What I do have planned is I've got a list of places that I would like to ride. There's a couple states. Colorado is one. I've ridden into Colorado, but I didn't really do the Rocky Mountain part of Colorado. And so I think I need to do some due diligence there. But I also, as I pick up these extra rides, I've got this thing where I want to connect it to my route. I just don't want to go ride somewhere to be riding somewhere. So we did a mission trip in Cactus, Texas here a few years ago. And so I kind of had this idea that I was going to ride Route 66. And I started around Joplin that connected with a route the north-south route that I was doing and rode from there to Amarillo and went north up into Cactus, which is in the Panhandle. And then from there, I rode on up into southeastern Colorado. So I'd like to go from like Denver down to there. I'd ridden to Toronto before. I'd like to do a trip around maybe the northern part of Lake Ontario and swing around that way. I just got some ideas, but Barbara's got some cruises planned for me, and it's in the prime bicycle.
You need to bring your bicycle on.
They don't let you put them on a cruise ship. Yeah, you got to rent them.
As you're talking about this, I'm imagining have you ever played the board game Ticket to Ride?
No.
Oh, you have a map of the United States and you're laying down cars of your train and you're having to connect to build a path. And so as you're describing, I want to ride here, but it has to tie into here. And I want to ride here and I could match up here. I'm just imagining like this travel montage in my head of the lines just moving across the country and all connecting together. And I think it's a really beautiful picture.
It's interesting. Now I brought this for you, Joe, because and my mind is as good as it used to be, but this is my cycling summary. And so you can see all the routes that I've kind of marked them off in there. And then this has all the different trips that I've done in here, how many days it was, what bike I rode. And it's kind of a summary.
I can have that?
You can have it.
I'll make a copy for Josh. This would be great.
But yeah, it just kind of gives you an idea where I rode. But when you talked about all the places you go throughout the country, one of the things that's been interesting is I meet somebody, where are you from? Oh, I'm from, such and such. Oh, I rode my bike through there, Yeah. And I'm able to connect with people a lot more and talk. And then it just, oh, where'd you ride your bike? And then I talk about my biking, and it's just an opportunity that I would have never had I done this. Just like, where are you from? Well, I'm from Dubuque, Iowa. Where's that? And now, yeah, I was there. I rode through that town. I was downtown. I ate at this restaurant. Yeah, I know that place.
That interconnectivity is not just geographic, but you've experienced some of the cultures. You've stopped at those locations. You've personally been there and seen it.
And one of the things, Joe, you mentioned, what's your next thing? I had this, another one falls into the dumb idea, the bad idea category, was that you can see there's some areas where I've got some open space out here.
Yeah.
And so I told Barbara, I said, maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a circle that represents the biggest area where I haven't ridden into, and then I'm going to ride through that to try and create smaller circles of areas. But it gets pretty remote, but yeah.
You say this isn't remarkable, but it's pretty It's pretty remarkable, Joe.
It really is.
Well, let me jump in, and you remind me of something I was going to say. One of the first long trips I did after I decided I was going to go. I went across the country. Okay, so that was a goal, and I got that done. And I came back home, and I did a couple of rides, and it was like, man, I'm not seeing anything new. I'm finishing where I started from, and I just started thinking, what do I want to do? And I thought, well, yeah, maybe we'll just take off and, let's just sell everything and we'll just be nomads on a bicycle and you can follow me around an RV. And Barb said, no way.
No,
No way.
I can say
Come up with a plan B. And so it was a few rides later and things that I got this idea. I called it 50 by 70. It was 50 states before I hit 70. And so I did. I got through it and I turned 69 in a couple of weeks here. But yeah, so we made it. Because I just knew that you just can't expect to put your body through this stuff and do this all the time. And so that was kind of how I got going on making these routes. But when you talked about something being done incredible, so I went and I rode with my son. I met him in Chicago. We rode up to Milwaukee. I drove him back that was a miserable ride. It was just,
I bet.
There was a beautiful trail, but it was early October. He had a break from teaching. And just drizzly rain.
It'd be all city too.
No, it wasn't. There was a lot of good trails to go from Chicago up to Milwaukee. But then I dropped him off and then I drove to Fargo, North Dakota. And so Barbara was in Kansas City. She's on the Board of Trustees at the Nazarene Theological Seminary. She was there for some meetings. She says, when I get done, I will rent a car and I've already rented a car down here. I don't want to come, but I'll meet you. And then we'll ride back down to Kansas City. And then from there, we were going to go to Greenville. It was my 50th or 40th graduation. Reunion. So anyway, this trip just became a disaster. I mean, I got trapped who would have thunk that you would have had a blizzard hit, Fargo, North Dakota in mid-October? Well, it did. I got trapped there for a day. I had a 70-mile day that I had to ride, and a wind chill started out was like 17 degrees.
You did it?
And I did it because I had to go through all this stuff. Barbara calls me. She says, we got a problem. I said, yeah, I know. I'm stuck south of Fargo in a blizzard.
No.
She goes, we got another problem. She goes, I forgot to get my driver's license update and I can fly, but I can't rent a car. So I didn't know what I was doing. We had all this weather situation. So long story short, she flew into Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And so I had to cut my ride short. And then she connected me with a Lyft driver. He drove me to the airport. I rented the car and then we went from there. So we stayed all kinds of it was weather stuff. Again, after that, we stayed on a riverboat on the Missouri River. It had flooded. I thought the thing was going to break loose in the middle of the night.
No.
Barbara's got a great story about haunted house. And I'll tell you, I'm not a big believer in this stuff, but some of the experiences we've had, there's another world out there. But anyway, so we get to Greenville and people are asking me, I rode my bike across, meet with friends and things. And one girl says, yeah, my son went cross country. I said, did he ride a bike? No, he longboarded. I said, what do you mean longboarded? A
like
skateboard, but a longboard,
That's
him
wild.
and his friend. And they started in Jacksonville and they went to San Diego because that was like the shortest way. And she goes, but I don't know how they did it. I'm so glad that he didn't pick up the phone when I called him a couple of times. I didn't want to know what he was doing. She goes, but they started out and this guy has he had a spiky hair, dyed pink. And he had a machete strapped on the side of him.
Oh my god!
And they were riding on the highways. The cops stopped them more than once.
That's a heck
and
of
I'm
a
just
vibe.
thinking, and I thought I had a story, and
That's pretty crazy.
but yeah, so there's always somebody else. I follow, people on Instagram. There's a young gal, she's riding her bike around the world by herself. There's another couple that I follow they're nomads and they ride. And in the time that I've been following them, she's got pregnant twice and had 2 babies and they're still riding.
No.
So yeah. So whenever I think that I've done something that's,
Well, you still
it
have.
just, yeah.
I want to ask you I can imagine some of the small towns that you got there, almost like ghost towns and things with maybe a gas station. And what's the most interesting, the one place that you remember where you stopped, where it was just, you just found great, unbelievable people and it was just like, or is there too many?
There are a lot, and I'll try and pick something that's not in the book. And particularly when Barbara was there, we have just had so much fun meet with some of these people. And man, I'll say I'll go back to the book because this was one of the experiences that I had. I had been struggling with the ride, and God was giving each day was like, I got through today, I'll get through the next day, I'll get to the next day. And I pulled into this little cafe in the middle of nowhere in Washington State. And I walked in and started talking to this guy. I ordered my coffee, sat down, and they had a little sandwich there. And it was the only place for like 50 miles that I was going to eat. And not that I couldn't have carried food, but I just wanted a break. And I started talking to this guy, and I find out he's a counselor, is a retired pastor. He helps, youth that are struggling with things. And we just had the best talk. And I'm going to pray for you. Things are going to work out. And then, the small town stuff coming in, the chit chat and stuff like that. And it was just such a great visit. And it was just so encouraging. And it really lifted me up. So I get ready. So I leave, I go to walk out the door, and he says, "Hey, Joe." I said, "Yeah." He says, "Are you going to pay for this?" So I went back and paid for my meal. But, it's just one of those things that and I hadn't expected that. I just thought, well, I'm going to stop at a little coffee shop and get something to eat and go on. And there's other places I walk in, and, it's the local crew that meets every day.
Yeah.
And I walk in, everybody's head turns and they look. And here's this guy coming in with this crazy, green, dirty fluorescent jacket and carrying a helmet and stuff, and with his bicycling shorts on. They just look at you and then they turn back, and you sit down. Okay, let's just get something to eat and get out of here.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to remind people, I know we're up against it, but the name of the book, the first book, is Bicycling Across America's Great Northwest, When Fear and Faith Collide, Joe Tarantino. It's a great book, and I wanted to read this just to end it. This is an excerpt from, or this is kind of the synopsis of your new book.
Of the new book, yeah.
And it hasn't been, you don't have a title yet.
We're working on, we should have one next week and get a cover, and we'll be ready to rock and roll.
There's no title yet, but it says, title takes readers through stunning and unforgiving landscapes, brutal weather, and epic, unforgettable bicycling adventures. Roll through the back roads, trails, and highways of the U.S. with the author, where each pedal stroke functions as a weaver's loom, creating a tapestry of the highs and lows of life and discovery over 5 decades. The challenges of reaching a goal while raising a family, dealing with aging parents, and juggling a career are woven into the threads of life, revealing an eclectic fabric seen from the perspective of a bicycle seat. I find that it's like, I've got to get this book. And here's a thing that I got from your book so far, and I think this one's even going to be better. I'm excited about it.
Well, it is because I've got editors helping me. So.
Okay. Well, I don't mean it because of that. This is a story of bicycling, but is a story of life. This is your life. This next book that comes out is your life, Joe. And this is phenomenal to me because we're going to experience all the ups and downs, everything that you went through in life over a period of 50 years riding, and broken up into 17 adventures. And I can't wait to read it.
Well, I'm excited to have it finally published because it's taken on many forms, and it is just, I released it to God, and there's been many times I just decided I just wanted to write about my bicycling, you know, and as my Myers-Briggs INTJ personality, every time it comes out, we don't do well sharing our feelings, and it's been a struggle. And so when I got to the point, I was like, man, I got to write this stuff down. And people are going to read it, and God just hit me and said, you asked me to protect you on this trip.
Amen.
How much faith did that take? I can do this for you too.
Yeah.
You need to conquer this fear as well. And so, but I appreciate you guys having me on here, and we'll get you, Joe, if anybody wants a copy of the first book or the other books coming out, they can get a hold of you if they can a lot of the money that I make off the first one, I shouldn't say make, because I've given more books away than I've sold. But we support the Hope House with the first book, and the reasons for doing that I'll talk about that later on in the first book as well. But if people want them and they can't afford them, I'll be happy to give them copies.
If people want to get in touch with the podcast, get in touch with us through that, and then I'll get in touch with Joe and we'll work it out through that.
And we'll
way.
get more information about the new book and same thing as well. So how people can connect
and when the
with
new
that.
book, we'll announce it definitely on this podcast too, so people they could actually look for a title.
And Joe, the thing is, and I've told people, it's not about selling books.
I get that.
It is not about.
I get that.
It is about what God revealed to me and how I feel that through these books, I can share it with other people and encourage them and support them. And whether or not they get them for free, whether or not they want to support the ministries that I'm helping to support, doesn't make any difference.
I hear you. And I think everybody, after spending an hour with you, I think everybody probably gets that.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's been a good conversation. I just want to thank you again for your time being on here. Thank you for all your hard work that you've put in over so many years to have such a fascinating and faithful story to be able to tell. If you guys have enjoyed what you've seen in this video or what you've heard in this podcast, I invite you to do a couple simple things to support us and to get this message out to more people. If you're watching on YouTube, you could like this video, you could leave a comment, subscribe to us so you can stay up to date with all the different episodes that we release. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, if you could give this a follow, if you could give a rating and review, these are all free ways that you can support what we do here, help this message get out to more people, and just let us know what you think. If you ever have comments or questions, feel free to comment those. We love hearing from our listeners and our viewers. But for now, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time.